By the end of this video, you will have all the tools you'll need to create the most efficient artifact farming plan for your own account to maximize your favorite characters and teams. With some simple calculations, we'll also be going through some breakpoints so that you know exactly which artifacts to roll, which artifacts to trash, which artifacts to strongbox, and when to switch focus away from a specific domain or character. As of the end of version 3.x, you'll want to go with a mix of the Deepwood and Emblem artifact domains, depending on the exact types of teams you're building for Abyss. With the leftover 5-star artifacts, they can be recycled into the Viridescent Strongbox first, followed by the Noblesse Strongbox after obtaining 1 or 2 4-piece Viridescent sets. These 6 sets provide significant boosts to the widest array of characters and teams. If you're from the future, I recommend checking the pinned comment for any potential changes to this plan. And now, let's begin breaking down artifact probability. Starting off simple, these are the main stat probabilities for each variant of artifact. Feathers and flowers always have flat attack and HP respectively, which leave just 3 artifact types to analyze. The sands is the simplest out of the bunch, with energy recharge and elemental mastery each having a 10% chance to be the main stat, and the remaining 80% being evenly distributed to HP, defense, and attack. For the circlet, crit rate and crit damage main stats are typically the best, with only a few rare exceptions. The goblet has the largest distribution of main stats thanks to having access to all variations of elemental damage bonus. However, over half of all goblets will have HP, attack, or defense main stats, leaving more valuable main stats with comparatively low individual chances. When first building a character, getting artifacts with the correct main stats to plus 20 is the most efficient improvement you can make for a damage dealer, following weapons, level 6 talents, and by extension a character's 4th ascension. Level 90 can also be a consideration for characters focused on triggering transformative reactions before optimizing Substats. Part 1. An artifact's strength is roughly split 50-50 between main stats and substats. A fully leveled 5-star artifact will have a total of either 8 or 9 substats, depending on if it starts with 3 or 4 respectively, meaning a full artifact set consists of between 40 and 45 substats across all 5 pieces. One main stat is equal to 8 max roll substats in terms of value. But what does max roll mean? Substats have a slight variance for how big their numbers are. Each one has a baseline maximum value. For crit damage on a 5-star artifact, its max value is displayed as 7.8%, but is approximately 7.77% before visual rounding. This is why crit damage becomes 15.5% when you get a second max roll instead of 15.6%. Then, a number ranging from 0.7 to 1, stepping by 0.1 is chosen, each number having an equal chance of being picked, which results in 4 possible values for the substat. If you've ever heard someone talk about low or high rolls, this is the principle they are referring to. The average multiplier for rolls is 0.85, so a subset with a 0.8 or 0.7 multiplier would be considered a low roll, and a 0.9 and 1 considered as high rolls. Multiple high rolls result in a subset with higher roll value. This is a layer of RNG that you should not be concerned with. Because a full artifact set has so many substats, the rolls often balance each other out close to the 0.85 average. Using the average, one main set is roughly worth 9.4 substats. Because roll value is usually such a small factor, it only becomes a real consideration when trying to maximize a character after the more important stages of artifact farming. There are 2 main rules for artifact substats. The first rule is that substats cannot match the main stat, and the second is that all 4 substats have to be unique. Because of these rules, artifacts have slightly different probability breakdowns for each substat they can have, depending on what the artifact's main stat is. But luckily, there's a very simple way of visualizing substat RNG. Here's the full list of possible artifact substats. Each one gets assigned a number representing its weighted probability. Notice that this means that a given flat stat is twice as likely to be picked compared to a crit stat. So, why are substats distributed in this specific way? To understand the answer, it's time to uncover exactly how valuable each substat is and figure out the optimal combination of stats. This is a chart that visualizes how much of an increase each substat gives. The graph's horizontal axis, going left to right, indicates the quantity of substats. Further right means more substats. The graph's vertical axis, going bottom to top, will show how much of a damage increase gaining a substat is. Higher up equals more damage gain. This line represents substats of attack percent. Even though each subset is worth the same amount of attack, the percentage increase slowly diminishes the more attack percent a character has. This is because a character's base attack which you can see when opening a character's stat details as this white number remains constant. It is only affected by the character's level and weapon. We care about percentage increase because, in Genshin's damage formula, every offensive stat gets multiplied with one another. Characters scaling, damage bonus, crit, and EM multiplier. For increasing damage, Elemental Mastery gets converted into a different stat called EM multiplier, or EMM for short. If you look into Genshin's stat page, you'll find this multiplier here, which is a slightly different formula for each type of elemental reaction. Damage bonus follows a similar trend as attack percent, with the key difference being that all attack percent scaling characters start off with the bonus 311 attack from their feather, which generally makes attack percent start off at a slightly lower point. EMM is a true multiplier that increases damage dealt, which is what we represented in this graph. Each formula has built-in diminishing returns, however, due to EM existing in the denominator. HP percent and defense percent scale similar to attack percent, but vary character to character due to the different ways characters scale off those stats. Some convert their HP or defense to attack, while others deal damage directly from their HP or defense stats. Crit rate and crit damage are the only stats not to diminish, but increase in value in the beginning. To keep things simple, crit damage gets stronger the more crit rate you have, with the 1:2 ratio maximizing the average multiplier gained from crit. A character that crits with 100 crit damage does double their normal damage. With 50% crit rate, half the time the character deals double damage, and in the other half, they deal normal damage. The average multiplier would then be 1.5. This number would be the character's crit multiplier, which is what the line of the graph refers to, effectively consolidating both crit rate and damage in an ideal 1:2 ratio. You can figure out any character's crit multiplier through this simple formula. It's very useful for deciding between a crit rate or crit damage main stat circlet. This damage optimization chart is very useful for deciding what main stats are best to use on a character. You pick out the point that's highest on the graph to decide which main stat to go for, after accounting for all of the buffs that you're getting. As an example, I'll go through a list of Xiangling's buffs, equipment, ascension passives, etc. that modifies the chart to tell us what artifact main stats and set bonuses to go for. And so with this setup in a team such as Rational, with her on the catch, the best main stats to go for would be an EM Sans, damage bonus, which comes in the form of pyro damage bonus from the goblet, and of course crit on the circlet. With all of that done, we finally have a chart that accurately depicts the amount of damage Xiangling gains per substat. Crit is not the end-all be-all. Yes, it's the stat that gives the biggest increase generally, but stats like attack percent and EM for EM scalars are not significantly behind. Even in unfavorable cases, 2 attack percent rolls can match or exceed damage gain from a crit roll. Energy recharge also should not be discredited. Exceeding baseline recharge requirements, while a damage loss compared to a stat that increases damage directly, allows for more room for error and player freedom in rotations, leading to a more comfortable experience for the average player in more difficult types of content. From this information, each character can be assigned their valuable substats, which will be defined as a substat that noticeably impacts character output performance. This will discredit insignificant flat stats when they are made obsolete by their percentage counterparts, as well as HP and defense on characters that do not have primary HP or defense scaling, as it only adds to a character's survivability. Obviously, valuable substats vary from character to character, but you can decipher them yourself without needing to make a graph by just analyzing a character's kit through these general rules. What stat do they primarily scale on in their talents? How many elemental reactions are they triggering? Are they solely triggering Melt and Vaporize? Are they contributing a significant amount of talent damage? How important or expensive is their elemental burst? And how much energy is the team generating? There will always be exceptions, but at the very least, following these rules will allow you to better hone in on the stats that your characters need. Depending on the starting number of valuable substats, you can predict how many good rolls an artifact is likely to get using binomial distribution, which is a fancy word for describing overall probability from many smaller probabilities. Let's say I'm rolling this crit rate circlet with one good substat, crit damage. It started with 3 substats and is currently at +4, so it has 4 more substats to gain. This makes the success probability 25%, which is repeated over 4 trials, and we want 4 successes. Plugging this data into the binomial distribution formula gives this probability. The odds that all 4 rolls are crit damage are just 0.39%, or 1 in 256. 3 out of 4 rolls into crit damage is about a 1 in 21 chance, and so on. We can do the same thing for artifacts with a greater starting number of valuable substats, which increases the probability of success, as well as artifacts that begin with 4 substat lines, which just increases the number of trials from 4 to 5. Another way of looking at these artifacts is in terms of average valuable rolls. A shorthand way of predicting how many valuable rolls an artifact will have is maximum possible substats times the number of good baseline substats divided by 4. For example, a 4 starting line artifact with 2 good substats is expected to have 4.5 good substats at plus 20, an equal chance of having between 4 and 5. Of course, not every artifact starting with 2 good substats is going to have 4 or 5 valuable rolls at plus 20. So, here is a more significant chart for expected valuable substat yield depending on how many valuable substats the artifact starts with. The text highlighted in white represents the endpoint for favored probabilities for each artifact type. Anything past the white text to the right means the artifact is not favored to gain that substat. As an example, an artifact with 3 good substats, started with 3 subset lines, is most likely to have at least 6 valuable substats. Anything beyond that is unlikely. We can also determine the realistic ranges for each artifact using this chart, which I will define by where the percentages are between 10 and 90%. Overall, these two lists are more important to memorize when farming artifacts, as they more accurately represent upgrade potential. Artifacts won't be worth rolling if their potential on a specific character does not match or exceed the current number of valuable substats they have. What I've been describing is ways to farm artifacts that conserve mora and resources. If you have the spare resources, then you can just afford to roll an artifact based on its maximum potential, not just the most likely probability. Once the artifact loses its potential to be an upgrade, then you can stop rolling it and feed it into a different piece. The more damage a character contributes to the team, the more their artifact quality matters. You want to prioritize the character dealing the most raw damage, then at some point switch to the second most, and so on. However, at what point is it worthwhile to switch characters? Let's find out. With the numbers in hand for obtaining artifacts, we can sort them into a list going from easiest to obtain to most difficult, to figure out the notable breakpoints for artifact farming. Breakpoints will differ from character to character depending on the number of valuable substats and which main stats are preferred. I've consolidated the data into comprehensible tables for each level of investment. Feel free to pause the video to see more specific purposes for each of these levels. To summarize the results, here are the general guidelines to artifact farming. 1. Get correct main stats for damage dealers. 2. Get correct main stats and important 4-piece sets, such as the Viridescent and Deepwood sets, for characters with lower damage contribution and meet their ER requirements. 3. Reach baseline subset investment for all damage dealers, going in order of damage contribution. 4. Invest more into damage dealers, and switch characters when a good investment level is reached. Artifact Strongbox value. The Strongbox gives slightly better odds at obtaining an artifact with 4 subsets to start. How much of an impact does this really have? As it turns out, not a super significant one. For getting artifacts with at least 5 valuable subsets for any variant, Strongbox increases the rate by less than 10%. Where it becomes more significant is for artifacts with at least 7 or more valuable substats, eventually maxing out at a 70% better rate for artifacts with the maximum amount of valuable substats, either 8 or 9. But a 70% rate increase on a really tiny chance is still a really tiny chance. With this knowledge, the Artifact Strongbox has 2 primary roles. First, to avoid farming artifact domains with only a single desired artifact set. This is mainly useful for getting baseline stats with correct main stats rather than for getting substat upgrades, since obtaining artifacts from the Strongbox is slower than farming in domains, even if only one set in the domain is useful. Second, to min-max characters whose sets have already been farmed for. I would recommend switching from domains to the Strongbox once the artifact set is somewhere between high investment and ceiling tier investment. Perfecting artifacts. An artifact's quality can sometimes play into what the next upgrade objective is. An artifact with 6 valuable substats, but perhaps only with 1 line of crit, may warrant aiming for another artifact with 6 valuable substats, but with more crit rolls instead, rather than shoot straight for one with 7 substats, which can change the 5-star artifacts you choose to roll versus discard. Near the beginning of the video, I claimed that the only place where roll value can be considered relevant is when players are hunting for perfect artifacts, where getting higher rolls is necessary to overcome the 50 crit value barrier. To briefly explain, crit value is a conceptual metric used to determine how many crit rolls an artifact has, and is not super useful for upgrading characters early on. Since crit rate and crit damage should ideally be in a 1-to-2 ratio with one another, calculating crit value is as simple as multiplying an artifact's crit rate by 2 and adding it together with crit damage. When there are 7 rolls of crit, accounting for roll value, the range of total crit value is between 38.1 and 54.4, with the average around 46.2. Having a total crit value over 50 is considered the final breakpoint for how good an artifact is by many, just from a big number perspective. With all the knowledge in mind, let's take a look at how long it would take for Xiangling to get an optimal build, where the best substat rolls are always crit, bringing the roll table for the rarest artifacts down to 2 valuable substat odds. In terms of constraints, the circlet is the most difficult piece to obtain due to it having a crit rate main stat, resulting in both the base probability of having 4 valuable subsets and needing to have all 4 rolls go into crit, making the probability much lower. This is followed by the sands for also having a main stat interfere with the best subsets, and then the goblet. Assuming an optimal crit circlet was obtained from a different set, obtaining a perfect EM sands becomes the dictator for the amount of time and resin spent, since every other artifact can be presumed to be collateral. However, this does indicate the chance should be looked at from a higher confidence level, which will lower the final odds even further. Artifacts have a 3.1625 to the -7 chance of being a perfect Xiangling on-set EM sands, also known as 1 in 3.16 million. This would already take nearly 2,000 years of non-stop artifact farming without ever capping resin to get without considering resin refresh. But we can go even further. Taking roll value into account makes the odds even lower. All 9 substats should ideally be max rolls, a 25% chance for each one. The final odds are approximately 1 in 830 billion. For reference, this would take a single Genshin account roughly 500 million years of artifact farming to achieve, or 100 million Genshin accounts farming for emblem pieces for 5 years straight every day, non-stop, and this is just the average. A higher confidence level would take even longer than this. And that's why you shouldn't bother with getting perfect artifacts with all crit rolls. Remember the key principles of this video, and your favorite characters will be significantly improved. If you enjoyed learning about optimization in Genshin, you may find some useful information in this video guide about whether or not it's optimal for you to wish on the weapon banner.